G'day to you, this is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. It's my pleasure to have as my guest today Major Roy Pitchford from 2RR Support Company. He was actually my former commanding officer, and as we were chatting off scene, we haven't seen each other for 47 years. We're both a little bit more wrinkled, but still both good looking. and, and it was while looking at Roy's last talk, which was episode 134, a very interesting talk, that I discovered he had the MFC, the Military Forces Commendation Medal, and I'd like to find out more about how he got that. He did chat about it or allude to it in his last talk, but there were no details given. So hopefully today we can get a lot more of the bone picked to find out what he did during that period. And welcome to you, Roy. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too, Tony. As you say, a lot of water under the bridge.
Yeah, huge waterfall. Anyway, in your last chat, you gave a very nice overview of what you did in your military career in Rhodesia, and I recommend anybody watching this interview to go back and listen to it. And it was fascinating that you were able to move almost at free will around the country with your 2RR Mortar platoon and anti-tank, I guess. But tell us about some of the journeys with that unit and where you ended up eventually in the southeast, where you got your MFC.
I'll try and keep it brief. After I'd done a couple of infantry call-ups with D Company, our training major called me in and said, Pitchford, I got really bad news for you. You going back to the School of Infantry. And I said, yeah, what have I done wrong to deserve that? He said, no, we're sending you on a mortar course and we're going to train you to be an instructor on mortars. Well, I thought, well, that sounds quite nice. And it was great to go back to the School of Infantry in Gwela, not as an officer cadet, the lowest form of life on the planet, to now go back as a lieutenant and actually stay in the officers' mess. So, for me, that was great. And it was I think it was a month-long course and what have you. So happy days, off back to the School of Infantry and to be treated like a human being for a change. And checked in, and on the Monday morning, presented myself at the tactical wing to attend this mortar instructor's course to discover I was the only officer on the course. The rest of them were from SAS privates up to colour sergeants in the RLI. But, yours truly being a territorial officer, mixing in with all these regulars, made for an interesting dynamics. But 10 out of 10 to the guys. I mean, they rose to the occasion and there was just absolutely no issues whatsoever. Did that course, completed it. And when I got back to 2RR, the training major called me back in and said, Roy, having done the course, you obviously now are going to take over the 2RR Mortar platoon from Keith Henderson, who was my predecessor and had been promoted to captain and was now 2RC of one of the companies. And I fetched up in the Mortar platoon with Ron Elsmore-Kerry and Chris Elsmore-Kerry and a whole bunch of other really good guys. Eddie van der Merwe, Sergeant Major Eddie van der Merwe, a really good bunch of guys. And on the Thursday evenings, we thought, well, we got to come down here. What the dickens are we going to do? So collectively, we said, let's learn how to use these mortars. Let's make sure we know what we're doing. And for me, that was great. We are fresh from this instructor's course, so we set about honing our skills and doing everything. And in dry runs, the boys got quite proficient at doing things without any live ammunition, I might add, and what have you. And then, because we were mortar platoon, we skipped a few call-ups. And because nobody registered, we've got 30-odd guys here in a mortar platoon. They're not going to the northeast. They just, So Colonel French got me in and said, you guys have been skiving me. Well, it's not deliberate, it just happened. He said, no fingers. He said, but we've been tasked with forming a new infantry company, E Company 2RR, and we're short of soldiers. And lo and behold, he has a complete platoon ready to go in. So of the 3 platoons, we only have to find 2 more because we've got you guys. Oh, hang on, boss. That's not. We train Mortarmen. It's wasting the skills and all the rest of it. He told me to dry my eyes, and he said, "Look, as a SOP, Pitchford, because I'm making you mortar guys go back to walking through the bush and looking for the gangsters. I'll let you be the 2RC of the company as a lieutenant because we just don't have enough officers to go around. So your platoon can go in, your sergeant major can do the work, and you can be 2RC of the company." So there was no way out of it. So off we went with E Company to the northeast. And as the 2RC of the company, I had to go up first. And I remember going into the jock, and there was a RAR colonel, one RAR colonel, I can't remember his name, who was the jock commander. So he looked at me and said, "You E Company 2RR?" I said, "Yeah, we are." And I gave him all the details and everything. And I said, just as a matter of interest, the 2RR mortar platoon is forming one of the platoons for E Company. He said, "You territorial? You got mortars?" Yeah. So what a waste of time. I said, "No, how do we know how to use those?" He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "What's more, we brought them with us. We didn't have any ammunition, but we had packed all our mortars and taken it up with us." And I remember him writing on the ops board, 2RR E Company brackets mortar platoon, and he said, "We'll bear it in mind. If anything comes up and we need you, we'll let you know." Well, blow me down halfway through the call up. He raided in and said, "Get your butt down here, lad." And I went in, and he said, "We're doing one of those HDOs where they took 3 or 4 companies, RAR, RLI, territorials, and they surrounded this terrorist base camp that they had found. And the whole idea was that we would we would mortar into the center of the base camp. And when all the gangsters bombshelled out, the infantry guys lying in ambush would sort them all out." So it sounded like a really, really good plan. So I said, "Yeah, we're up for that." And he said, "There's one further complication, however, Pitchford." He said, "In addition to the 2RR mortar platoon, the RAR mortar platoon will be working with you." Okay, because now this is the regulars. And he said that the issue I have, Pitchford, is that the RAR mortar platoon officer is on R&R. So I'm going to put the RAR mortar platoon under your command, and you will command both platoons, and both platoons will fire this HDO task. Well, that wasn't part of the deal as far as I was concerned, but what can you do? So the next day, this RAR mortar platoon fetches up at E Company base. The infantry guys are now all going off to do this HDO, and the sergeant major of the RAR comes to me, "Ishe, reporting for duty and awaiting your instructions." Van der Merwe and myself and Ron Elsmore, we look at each other and say, "Yeah, okay, well, find a shady spot and make yourselves at home, where the rations are." Thanks, Ishe, and off they went. That afternoon, he says, "Permission to do some practice drills." Oh, of course, yes, absolutely. So now here's the 2RR mortar platoon watching these RAR guys going through their mortar drills and everything, sequences, whatever. You didn't know half of what these clowns were doing. They knew so much more. Anyway, that night, off we go, sneak with our mortars, and we get into position. And what I discovered during the afternoon rehearsals and preparation was that the RAR had the new 81mm long barrel mortar. As territorials, we still had the French short barrel 81mm mortar, and the two are not compatible. The range tables, everything, not compatible. So we couldn't fire the mission together. We had to break it up. We had to do part, and the RAR had to do part, which is what we did. But the drills were one thing. It was the computation of the ranges using the plotting boards where the real skill was required. And in fairness to the RAR, they didn't have the sort of educational background that the white territorial part-time soldiers had. And during the fire mission, we got through our sequence so much faster than the RAR. that they actually came over and said, would we go over and help them finish their side of it, because they just were not able to keep up. And for us to be able to use these new South African mortars was really good. Anyway, we finished the mission. It all went according to plan, with one exception. This so-called terrorist camp didn't actually exist, right? There were no gangsters there. So after firing all that stuff and doing everything, the infantry guys didn't find a single adult, and it was a complete and utter waste of time. But a heck of an interesting exercise. Unbeknown to me, that RAR Sergeant Major went back to his colonel at the jock and said, those oaks from Tuareg, they know how to use their mortars. I didn't know about this. And when we got back off to Caller, I was called into the colonel's office, and he said, I've got a letter from Army HQ written by the RAR commanding officer commending you guys on your ability and what you can do and all the rest of it. And, you know, he was very chuffed that Tuareg had been recognized by Army HQ for having some expertise and what have you. And that led to a very interesting situation for us, because it was at the time that Umtali started to get attacked from the Mozambique side. And so few units even bothered to unpack their mortars. They didn't know how to use them. But they needed a mortar platoon at short notice to go up and assist protect Umtali. And of course, with this letter and Army HQ, suddenly 2 of our mortar platoon were detached from 1 brigade. We were shipped up to 3 brigade, based at 3 Independent in Umtali, and had to put in our mortar line there in the event that Frelimo had another go at Umtali, which, bless their little hearts, they did. And that gave us a really good excuse now to do something in anger to defend the country. Of course, the armored car boys, they played a really good role as well. And yeah, Frelimo was shown the error of their ways, and the whole thing then petered out, and there was no more problem. But
Roy, whereabouts were your troops physically located? Was it right on the border or up on a hill somewhere?
Adams Barracks.
Okay, right at the barracks.
Yeah, we were based right at the barracks. The armored cars were there, and we had a mortar line in the barracks because it was ideal into Mozambique, where the threat was thought to come from. So that worked well. But during and we were based there permanently. So the mortar platoon broke up into three lots. So there was a constant 2 presence, but we all did, we did a month in and 2 months off, or whatever it was. So there was this rotational, and during the rotation, RLI used the guys on one of their crossings externally to secure it, help them out to find a corridor for them to come out on one of their. So we started to do quite a lot of stuff with the regular troops in the area.
That was a dream posting, hey?
Oh, it was, because one brigade, we were no longer part of 1 brigade, so nobody hassled us. 3 brigade, we were guests, and they just presumed 1 brigade were looking after us and keeping us in check. Well, 1 brigade didn't pay any attention to us. 3 brigade didn't pay any attention to us. It was dream posting, because we did our own call-ups, we did our own rotation. Nobody asked us any questions. It was, it was fantastic. The highlight of the trip there, though, was General Walls and Miss Rhodesia fetched up to pay the troops a visit, to raise morale and spirits. and we had Miss Rhodesia sitting on top of an armored car roaring around the place, and everybody was having a wonderful time with Miss Rhodesia. But one of my sergeants, bless him, a guy called Jacobus Johannes Bronkhorst. Okay, he was a real good Englishman, this boy.
Yeah.
And he said to me, permission for me to speak to General Walls. So I said, what about? He said, I just have a complaint. So I thought, okay, Bronkhorst, you want to be stupid? You go and complain to General Walls. So he fetched up there, stood to attention, and said, General, may I please address you? I have a complaint. And the rest of us looked at this guy and thought, we didn't really think he'd be that stupid, but he did it. And General Walls said, Sergeant, what is your problem? What's your complaint? He said, we territorials, okay? We 2 are. We are the first reserve, 6 RR and 9 RR. They're all the old guys and the has-beens. We've got these short French mortars, and these reserve battalions who don't know how to use them have got the new stuff being issued by South Africa. And we don't think that's right. We need new equipment. It's not right that we should have the old equipment doing what we do. Oh, well, it's not a bad complaint. I should have been the one thinking of that, not Broncos. But anyway, he got the message across, and sure enough, within a week, we had complete new equipment supplied to us, 8 of these new South African long barrels and blah, blah, blah. That was great. So those were some of the highlights. But of course, eventually, 4RR, who were based in Umtali, it was their hometown, they finally got their mortar platoon trained, and then they relieved us. But we spent a good 12 months up there and had a wonderful time. But all good things come to an end. And we were then reattached to 2RR, reattached to 1 Brigade, and we had to join the battalion at where's that railway station, that connection from South Africa? Rutenga. Yeah. We had to pitch up at Jock Rutenga. And I remember Colonel French saying, yeah, you boys have been YYing for a long time. Now you back home and I can keep an eye on you. And the holiday is over.
Yes.
Yeah. So you boys are now going to start doing your fair share. And having just been issued all this new equipment, they also issued new ammunition, the M61 round as opposed to the M57. And we had this beautiful runway at Rutenga, and the Air Force had just been issued new armored cars with a 60mm mortar on them. And they didn't know how to use them. So we formed them up and we trained them on their 60mm mortar armored cars and what have you, and they became proficient at it. And then we said to the colonel, we'd like to do some training with our new ammunition, our 81. We'll base it at one end of the airfield, and we'll range in on the other end, and everybody can watch us experts, see. Okay, so we did that, and we fired all these things off, and we cleared the area where the target was. We swept through and made sure that it was clear of everything, and did everything. And the next day, we had to go and recover a vehicle. I had to drive through this area, and there were these dead cows everywhere and wounded cows. We couldn't believe it because we cleared it. Where did these mombies come from? Anyway, we had to go and see the farmer and explain, we're terribly sorry. And the farmer said, you boys don't know just how much trouble you are actually in. I said, well, break it to us gently. He said, do you know who owns this farm? I said, I have no idea who owns this farm. He says, the Prime Minister. This ranch belongs to Ian Smith. And you've just slaughtered one of his pride herds.
Oh, no.
Well, that's it. Gulag Yarkam. And the farmer came down with us to do the inspection, and he dispatched all the wounded animals that hadn't died. And when I said, well, we swept through the area, we did everything, we don't know where these cows came from. He said, in your defense, what happens? The bang, the explosion, curiosity would have drawn the cattle in, and they wouldn't have understood. And they had come in to see what the noise was, and that's how come you killed them. I could do another presentation on the Board of Inquiry leading to the proposed court-martial of Captain Pitchford for doing in the Prime Minister's mombies. But that's for another occasion. And now we wriggled out of that one. At that stage, the RAR Mortar Platoon were down at Villa Salazar with the Selous Scouts. And the Selous Scouts were trying to prevent Malvernia from being a jumping-off point for terrorists coming into Rhodesia. And they were getting well and truly stomped. So we had this plea, can we get our butts down to Villa Salazar and lend a hand? But the rains were such that no vehicles could get through. So they put in, the Rhodesia Railways came down, they brought a ghost train, loaded all our trucks, everything on, plus the artillery and armored cars, and we ran a ghost train from Rutenga down to the siding just before Villa Salazar, where we unloaded everything, and then quietly went into Villa Salazar. And we got there just as the most horrendous punch-up started. It was unbelievable. And I remember John Murphy and John Early from the Sleuth Scouts just said to me, Pitchford, get all your guys, get them underneath your vehicles, and they stay there. If I see one of your guys running around doing anything, I will personally shoot him. Okay, get out of our hair, stay under there, and just keep out of our way. And artillery were firing, and it was wonderful fireworks, all the stuff going off, and we watching it and what have you. And I was speaking to Murphy, and I said, "What are these RAR guys firing at? What's the target?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not sure." So I went to the RAR guys and I said, objective target. No, this is a harassing shoot. I said, what do you mean it's a harassing shoot? We are just planting bombs everywhere and anywhere we can in Malvernia, hoping to dissuade the Frelimo from us. I said to Murphy, this is not making a lot of sense. You guys, where do you think the target areas are? Where do you think the firing's coming from? So Murphy, showed me on the map and everything, got the plotting boards, planned the thing, got these guys to fire properly. And sure enough, it all calmed down because they were now targeting the Frelimo thing, and the whole thing died down. And after a few days, Murphy said, look, let's the RAR go back to wherever they were. You guys are here now, and we can work together. And that was the start of 18 months of working with the Sleuth Scouts, Malvernia, the raids across, etc., etc. And we came under intense engagements, being there, sometimes with the Scouts, sometimes without. And on occasions, it got really, really dodgy. And the Air Force came in with the hunters to quieten down the Frelimo troops. And then on two occasions, the Canberras came in with 1,000-pound bombs. And the first one, they dropped 6 of these things, but buried them in the sand because they were dropping them far too close to front line. And it was not permitted to drop munitions close to your own troops. So much so that Sleuth Scouts said, we're leaving, because nobody can bomb that accurately, 600 meters in front of the trenches. It's not worth the risk. We're leaving. So we said, all right, we'll leave the gate open. You can come back in the morning. And they didn't leave. But we had a camera on top of a mast, and we monitored all the positions. And those Air Force guys, all 6 targets, were absolutely spot on. And 1,000-pounder going off, buried 60 feet into the sand, is an awesome experience. They collapsed the bunkers. They buried it. It was just mayhem. And that was the end of it for a while. And it continued. And then they had another go at us. But this time when the Canberras came in, they now had a practice run. They came in and they let the bombs detonate on the surface. And that was an experience, having these 1,000-pound things going on. And that basically, dissuaded Frelimo that it's not a good idea to aggravate it.
Roy, before we carry on, or before we go back to it in more detail, can you tell me what the camp looked like from an aerial view at Villa Salazar? Where were your bunkers? Where was your control point? What did it look like from the air?
Well, Villa Salazar was the first BSAP base that they ever abandoned in their entire history. And I remember when the BSAP guys left, after we'd been there a couple of months for the Scouts, they were literally tears in their eyes. And they lowered the flag and they abandoned the first BSAP post in its history. There was a complete camp. There was customs, immigration area. There was housing for the staff. There was a huge canteen, bar, recreational area. It was a big camp. But a lot of the buildings were damaged and what have you. So what we did, we put our mortar line in amongst the buildings, okay? And it turned out to be very useful because the sound deflection, it wasn't easy for them to pinpoint where the Dickens we were. And we eventually, at one stage, we had 10 81mm mortars dug in because the Sleuth Scouts said, there's no point in us having mortarmen. Here's our mortar, here are our mortars, here's our ammunition. you fire them for us. We had 9RR came down to give us a hand because they wanted some experience. And so at the height of things, we had 10 81mm mortars dug in on the line. And because the unit that we were with, the Sleuth Scouts, reported directly to the Prime Minister's office, we didn't have the normal constraints of brigade and this, that, next thing. And when John Murphy said, I want ammunition or I want this, it came straight away. It was a really unique experience. But occasionally, Frelimo did manage to get reasonably accurate. And I can remember a 3-bedroom house in front of the mortar line that was sort of protecting us a bit from the incoming machine gun and anti-aircraft fire, got hit by a B-122 recoilless rocket. And we sat there, well, looking over the top of our mortar line, and a complete 3-bedroom house disappeared in front of us. There was zero left afterwards. And the thought was, if that hit the mortar line, but thank God, none of them ever did. And one of the great blessings I remember about the whole time, 18 months we were there, and under all that pressure and attack, never lost a guy. Not a single guy was even badly wounded. We were looked after.
Did you have top cover over your lines? You just facing the air, and that was it?
Yeah, well, the mortars were dug into mortar pits.
Yeah.
Obviously you got to fire back. The only thing that was under top cover was our control room, and Army had sent down a video camera that was attached to the top of a 100-foot mast, and we had a TV screen in the bunker, and we could control this camera from in the bunker. So when Frelimo were having a go at us, we would pan through and we'd actually pinpoint where they were firing from. And then on the map in front of us, we could get a 8-figure grid reference. And of course, the whole thing was sorted out. And Murphy and John Early, ex-Vietnam boys, they were unbelievable soldiers. And they could work out from the B-10 and the B-122 where these things hit in the camp, and the hollow charge would bury into the soil. They could work backwards and determine the range and give us fairly accurate positions of where these things were being fired from. I mean, they were smart, those guys. And of course, the B-122 was out of our range. We couldn't get it. So Army would then send down the artillery, and the artillery boys would come in with 6 25-pounders, and they would clobber these things and very effectively. I mean, they were amazing, those artillery guys, ably supported by a bunch of smelly, hairy, bearded fellas going across to actually guide things. And on some of the targets, these scouts would crawl virtually up to the target and hide themselves in it and bring the mortar fire down on them to be absolutely certain they got the Frelimo guys. They were phenomenal soldiers, those guys. But it was that 18-month period, and we used to support them when they went to Mpai and they attacked Mpai and what have you. There was that 18-month period under working with the Sleuth Scouts at Villa Salazar and getting mentioned in reports every other week that, I don't know who it was, somebody put up a report to Army HQ, and that's where the MFC came from. That sort of sustained period of doing whatever we were doing. For us, it was a lot of fun, but they thought it was, the morale was always good, and so, that's why the thing came about.
So this was a mini Vietnam for that whole period, run by a couple of Yanks and yourself. Did you have that atmospheric pub where you could go to in the evenings with the dim lights and have a drink and chat? Did that type of thing exist like you see in the movies or not? Oh, look at that.
Gonna stagger in Villa Salazar.
How about that?
This is the pub, okay?
Yeah.
And that was set up by the BSAP and taken over by a 2RL support company. But Gona Stagger Inn was the name of the pub at Villa Salazar.
And it never got hit?
The pub itself never got hit, but the kitchen that we attached to it did. And I don't know what hit it, but all the gas canisters went off. Those big yellow red things that they used to supply us with. And that was quite exciting when all that went up in smoke. And lots of flame, and it didn't do any damage or anything, but it just looked really spectacular. But that engagement, it was the closest that they ever got to inflicting any damage on us. Every single one of our vehicles, all the tires were flat. That's how close the mortars were coming in. And we had a complete fleet of vehicles up under any tires. They were all flat. It was quite a hoot. So yeah, I wish we could have made a movie of it, but obviously you couldn't. And the memories of it.
I bet Murphy, who was quite well known for his gung-ho attitude, must have really loved that whole scenario after being in Vietnam.
Oh yeah. He did have a criticism. He said, you Rhodesians are mad. He said the next army I volunteer and fight for as a mercenary, I'm going to get paid a hell of a lot more than I'm getting paid by you clowns. But he had an attitude to life that this sort of nonsense had to be stood up against and had to be dealt with. And his sidekick, John Early, was also a captain, had come to us from East Germany, and he was part of the American forces that used to cross into Eastern Berlin or East Germany, and they would come across, and he got to be quite friendly with a lot of the East German officers, and even got to the stage where he would be invited to their home for meals, and he would reciprocate when they came to West Germany, West Berlin, and what have you. And he then decided to leave the US Army, and he had signed up to join the Rhodesian Army. And he says he was at a meal with one of these East German officers, and he said, "This is our last meeting, and I'm leaving the US forces. I'm going out to join the Rhodesian Army, and I'm going to fight in Rhodesia." And he said this East German officer couldn't believe it. He just shook his head. He said, "I can't believe that that's happening, because the East German, have been posted to Mozambique to train the Frelimo army." And these two boys looked at each other and said, we are opposing forces here, but we're very friendly. Now we're going to go into a situation where potentially we are going to be in conflict with one another.
Wow.
How ironic is that?
That's a wonderful nuggets of history there. This is what I try to dig out of these talks, Roy, is all these little details. I don't like glossing over stories. This is fantastic. Wow, what a thing.
Well, we saw some of these East German officers in Malvernia. They used to wear bright red berets. It was madness. And of course, being white, they stuck out like the proverbial dogs, you know what, all right? And we're sitting there with Murphy and Early, all right? We're looking through the biners, and on one of the buildings in Malvernia, on the top, flat roof building, we see a whole lot of soldiers and one or two Witoaks amongst them. And we have a look. And sure enough, here are some East German officers on the front line training the Frelimo troops. And Early said to me, he said, "Pitchford, what's the chance of you hitting that roof with your first round?" I said, "No problem. Piece of cake." And all of me said, "But mortar is an area weapon. You've got to range it. You're talking nonsense." I said, "Test me." So they said, "Okay." I think we might have had 6 or 8 mortars. We put 2 or 3 rounds in quick succession, and that whole building just erupted. What I hadn't told those guys is that we saw that as an observation position before, and we had ranged it very, very accurately. So for the chances of getting it with the first round were hugely improved because we had ranged it before, but we hadn't told them. But still, the climate difference, the wind and blah, 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 it was pure, unadulterated luck that first rounds got on that building and we didn't have to range, and we didn't give them a chance to then scramble and disappear. But of course, in the mind of Early and Murphy, they looked at us and said, "You guys are wizards. with your mortars. Little did they know that we were cheating, actually. We had actually ranged the thing previously, and that's why we were able to do it. But there were so many of these little incidents that come to mind when you think of that time. And some of the soldiers that we came across, there was a colour sergeant from the British Army, and this boy was a sniper. And he had the most amazing weapons. He had AK-47s with telescopic sights. And this guy would get into positions right up the front. And he was incredible how accurate he was. And on one occasion, they went in, they were doing something in Malvernia, we were supporting them, and they got surprised. And they got pinned down. And they were surrounded. So Murphy said, what are you boys going to do? Well, we weren't going to go and storm across the border and rescue them, because there were 700 of them and there's only about 30 of us. So that wasn't going to happen. So we fired a corridor. We put down two rows of mortar fire so that we could break the cordon and the scouts could run between this fire line and get out, which is exactly what they did. But this British guy couldn't resist it, because now the Frelimo were running up on the surface. And for him, it was like shooting cows in a crawl. And he couldn't resist it. And he lagged behind and unfortunately got one in the head and was killed. And, Murphy didn't want to leave him behind for obvious reasons. And so they created a nonsense and a diversion. And we actually drove in to Malvernia with a 4.5, a Mercedes 4.5, but our stores vehicle, with the canopy on the top. We drove in with the stores vehicle to get this guy out. And he was brought out, and then they had to pack up all his belongings, and obviously he was sent back to the UK. But unpacking all his stuff and seeing his sniper rifles and the equipment that he had, it's just amazing. And where these guys came from and why they joined in the Rhodesian army, we never knew. We just came across them because we were attached to this unit. And but we never got. They never spoke about why and how and everything. But they were amazing soldiers, and we had some amazing times with them.
I've read quite a lot of stories about them, and I think a lot of them really just didn't like communism, and really wanted to fight against it wherever they could, and identified with our people, and ended up loving our people so much that some of them even called Rhodesia their home. Which is amazing. Give us a few more nuggets if you can. I'm fascinated by these hunters dropping these 1,000-pounders. Now, if I'm not mistaken,
it was Tony, it was Canberra's that dropped the 1,000-pounders. Canberra bombers.
Right.
They could carry 6. The hunters came in with their 30mm cannons and their rocket pods. And on the one occasion, Frelimo were getting a little bit too cocky. And they had these Swedish Army Berlioz trucks that could actually drive through the minefield, and the mines wouldn't stop them. And that was our worry. And so Air Force sent in 2 hunters, and we had to direct them onto the targets, which we did various ways. Some of them we just dropped a smoke bomb on it and these guys. And the first 2 hunters came in and expended everything that they had, and returned to Thornhill, but said there were still targets left behind. So Air Force sent another section down, but this time there were 3 of them, as opposed to 2. And they hammered Malvernia unbelievably, and got to the point where they were now needing to return because of fuel, but they still had munition. So they said, please scratch your head. Is there anything else that we can stonk for you whilst we're here? So they expended everything. But these guys were flying so low. They almost disappeared behind the trees, as it were, from where we were. And the fact is that Frelimo had the 12.75 and the 14.5 anti-aircraft guns. We knew because they would lower them and fire them into Villa Salazar. But despite that, these Air Force guys went in unbelievable low level and pulverized these targets. And for a long time, that was the end of nonsense from Frelimo. And then I think one of the bright boys said, but these jets can't fly at night. They can't see us at night. So if we now attack at night, then we're going to get these boys. And that's what they did. But somebody at HQ or at Air Force had planned for this. And when that next attack came in, they said, okay, Pitchford, but this time it's Canberra, and they had given us flares and they're marked out, and our whole process of how to do it to guide the Canberras in, which we did. They dropped their bombs 13 kilometers behind us. Okay, they jettisoned them to hit a target 600 feet in front of us at night, based on a flare that was lit at a precise time and in a precise place. And I remember Murphy and Early saying, no Air Force can bomb that accurately. It is just not possible. And those Canberras did it. First with delayed action, so the bombs went off underground and wouldn't affect us. But the second time, they did them on the surface. Just absolutely phenomenal flying expertise. It was incredible. And to have guys like Early and Murphy talk about the artillery and their accuracy and the Air Force and their ability, for me, that was real commendation, because they'd been through Vietnam. They knew what it was all about. For us, it was, almost part-time.
Yeah.
But when those guys complimented artillery and the Air Force and what have you, it was a real compliment, because they were.
Yeah, gee, that must have been incredible. From what I've read, the safety margin on 1,000-pounder is 1,000 meters or something like that, and you guys were only 600 meters away.
The front trenches were 600 feet.
You're joking.
Yeah, it was. But yeah, as I said, those Air Force guys were.
Wow.
And that gave us a lot of courage. Enabled us. We had a minefield around us, and the engineers would regularly come down and make sure everything was all right. So to get to us, I had to get through a minefield. But you knew you had a battery of 25-pounders behind you. On occasions, we had the armored cars there. They too were really good. And then if all else failed, you had the Air Force. And we knew that if it really got tough, somebody would come in and make a difference. And they did. And so doing what we had to do was so much easier because of the support and backup that you got from the rest of the units.
Did you only have 25-pounders? I know that we have 5.5 howitzers from South Africa. Did any of those come down that way?
No, we never saw the 5.5-inch guns. They were there, but they were never deployed down to the southwest. Or when we went to Vic Falls, we were based up at Vic Falls towards the end of the war. We only had the 25-pounders and the armored cars. I never actually saw the big ones.
Correct. Yeah. I think they may have operated at Kazangula when Don Price was having fun up there. But yeah, no, very interesting.